just to start, I'm using a Verifier HD MST. So this is a piezo interferometer. It's phase shifting, but it phase shifts by ramping the wavelength. So this is kind of a special system if you're not familiar with the MST. So you'll see some things that are special to the MST in the webinar today, but most of what you'll see is going to be pretty standard for all piezo style interferometers that could be upgraded to MX 8.0 when it releases. So without further ado, let's get started. You can see here on the screen, this is the MST application. So it looks very similar to the form application with some extra stuff. So along the left side is this new measurement setup panel. We're here in the measurement tab. And it's really intended to kind of highlight your workflow. So we want to help you set up a measurement, configure any options, set up your masking, and then we'll take our measurement. And along the bottom, we put indicators. So for each step in the process, you can see if you've done things that you may need a little checklist for, lateral calibration or masking. We've also got little links to surface processing, and you can see if you're subtracting any system error down there. So first off, we've got our measurement type control. I'm going to start by doing a simple form measurement. It's just where we measure the surface error. I'm going to just measure a plano part against a transmission flat. So I'll start by aligning that part. Now you can see down in the bottom right here on the live display, we've got a little picture-in-picture view of the align camera. What's really nice about that is when I just need to go over and kind of get a dot lined up roughly to the center, no need to switch to align mode and then switch back. I'm down away from the computer. I don't have a hand free for the remote because I'm adjusting my part. It makes it nice and easy to do all of this without needing to worry about which camera mode I'm on right now. So we can get our part lined up right there, nice and simple. Now I'm just going to go through, take a look at measurement mode. Now, because this is an MST, I've got some special options here, both FT PSI and wavelength shifting PSI. Now, one new feature for the MST in a MX 8.0 is going to be the addition of QPSI to the MST measurement mode. So QPSI is the Zygo vibration tolerant measurement algorithm. If you watched our most recent webinar, we talked a lot about the effect that QPSI can have on reducing the effect of environment. And now that functionality is available for all the MST measurement modes. So here we'll use wavelength shifting QPSI. For this, I need to enter my cavity length. Just take a quick look. Say that's about 30 millimeters. Don't need to be too exact because I'll hit the adjust button here. Now, one of the things that I really like about this new kind of workflow is that before, if you wanted to laterally calibrate, and if you remembered to laterally calibrate, because a lot of times it's very out of the way, now it's right up in my face and I can select lateral calibration and perform it right on a live display. So I'll choose to just calibrate, right to my aperture size, drawing directly here on the live display, drawing that circle. I could adjust it if I wanted to, but I'll say it's good enough. I'll type in our size and hit set. So now I've done my lateral calibration. You can see I already had one done, but the check mark down at the bottom left is green, indicating our spatial sampling is set. So now we'll go over to the options tab. The options tab has some of the other kind of measurement or algorithm controls that you may be familiar with. One thing that's had some changes is the light level controller. So here I'm on manual light level, which means I can move the slider just like we could before. I could adjust my shutter speed manually as well if I wanted to do so. There's also an auto set button. So this is a one-time light level adjustment. If you've used any of our optical profilers, you'd be used to the F9 hotkey for that. So that's now enabled for the piezo systems as well. And if you don't want to do any of that, there's always the automatic option. This will just do continual light level adjustment while you're viewing your part and when you go and perform a measurement. One of the nice things is this ignore bright points control. So if you actually have a decent one right here, have tiny little things in your system or on your part. Actually, this is a relatively dirty flat, so I'm not too surprised about this. You can have issues, maybe you've seen them yourself, where your light level gets driven by these bright little hotspots. And the ignore bright points control just lets you kind of ignore the brightest pixels and make sure that your light level doesn't get unduly influenced by those kind of stray bright spots. You've also got your controls for averaging, and your signal processing options like your modulation threshold are all in this panel as well. We also have a nice new system error subtract here. So I'm measuring with a Zygo Ultra Flat, which is a 40th wave transmission flat. And when you buy one of those flats, or if you have Zygo certify any of your flats, you can opt for a absolute calibration file that comes with your flat. And then when you're measuring, you can subtract that absolute calibration file from your measurements. And so this gives me a nice little preview of what that data looks like. Make sure the camera size and the lateral resolution are correct. You can see here, this check mark indicates that my system error will be applied because the file properly matches my instrument. And then we have the masking and traceability tab. This is a place where you can apply masking. What's really nice is just like lateral calibration, you can mask directly onto your live display. If you draw a mask, you can adjust it right here as well. You can change it from an acquisition mask to a surface mask, unfill it and fill the background. Most of the controls that you're familiar with from the lateral calibrator, or from the mask editor, excuse me, are all available right here directly on the live display as well. But if you need to do complex things like grouping shapes, or if you're just more familiar with the mask editor, it's always available for you right there with that button. So we'll leave masks off for now. But when we look at an angles measurement, we'll come back to those. And then the traceability section is just a convenient little section that lets you track things like part number, serial number, if you want those to be logged into your data file. So every time we take a measurement and we create that data file, we always track the value of all the controls so that you can always go back to a measurement and say, okay, what was the part number? But also, what was the measurement type? What was the measurement mode? Did I subtract system reference? All of that will be tracked in there as well. So now we're pretty much all set to take our measurement. And there's our data right there. And you can see a little bit on the edge. One thing that maybe some of you are thinking that I forgot to do is to just check focus on my interferometer, which actually should be pretty good. You're never going to completely get rid of diffraction, but just to make sure, we can put a flag into our cavity and just make sure our edge is nicely focused. That actually looks pretty good. Then, of course, if we wanted to, maybe remove that edge effect, a nice, easy way to get into our surface processing step here, with that button right down on the lower side. And then we can just turn on maybe an auto aperture. And there we go. So that's a nice, simple measurement where, we kind of looked at the measurement setup panel, but we didn't change a lot of the rest of this area. Let's take a look now at angles. So I'm going to measure a right angle prism. So you'll see that my measurement type list only has these 3 options shown. Those are the last 3 options I've selected, but I can easily pop out all measurement types. I'll choose angles here. And now I will just come over and move the transmission flat. And we'll get a nice big right angle prism. And I'll just adjust that a little bit here. Looks pretty good. All right, so now we've got the angles measurement type selected, and you'll see that created a set of controls that are specific to angles. And now what we're going to do is a prism measurement, internal single pass. And you can see that we have an indicator telling us that we have to define test and reference masks. And we've got a nice convenient little mask button here that just pops us over to the masking tab. So now, rather than acquisition and surface mask types, I have acquisition, angles reference, and angles test masks. So I can select the reference, and then again, I can draw my mask right on the live display, switch to test, and do the same. Now, if you're in a situation like this and the picture-in-picture window is starting to get in your way, it's easy enough to minimize right down to the corner, and you can always bring it back when you need it. So now I've got my reference and test masks drawn. It's got my refractive index set. Cavity length, a little bit longer than that. And since I haven't changed my transmission flat, no need to redo lateral calibration. So here we can just take a measurement. And there's our result. So we can see our test and reference data together, just our test data, and then our intensity map showing our masks. Now, if you're familiar with the old angles interface, you'll remember that there is no built-in live display there. The layout's a bit different. Many of these controls are located on the bottom center of the screen. We've really tried to go to a much more consistent and standardized view. So the instrument that I'm working on right now only has one monitor. And so having the pop-out live display is really nice when you have that second monitor set up. But obviously, in this case, I really just want everything on one screen. That pop-out live display is of course still available, but I'm no longer expected to have access to it. Along the right side, you're always going to see your results. So here we have the angle error of this prism, as well as attributes of the measurement. And that's going to be consistent even if you start looking at some of the other measurement types. So for example, I don't have a radius bench set up here, but we can take a look at the radius scale measurement type. And it's a very similar layout. We have our live display, we have our confocal position and our cat's eye position measurements, and then along the right side, results and attributes. So you're going to see a much more kind of consistent and well thought out kind of layout to these tools. All of our radius controls, along the left side. And for those of you looking for some of the more advanced controls, you'll notice this little more button will just pop out. Some of the controls that most people are never going to need to touch, but that you may occasionally need if you're doing a more complicated setup or if you're a more advanced user. So now let's take a look at a MST specific measurement. This is going to be a parallel window. So I'm going to switch us to the measurement type parallel window simple. Now, I know that's what measurement type I was looking for, but in case you're a regular human and you don't always remember what each of these parallel window setups looks like, what's really nice about this new measurement panel is this integrated help functionality. So if you just click the little question mark and you can see that those are available in many places in the interface, you'll get a nice quick pop-up of the MX help that'll walk you through what it is you're looking at. So this is some MST application help right from clicking on right there. So now I'm just going to remove our prism. And I'll grab my parallel window. So this is just a small, thin piece of parallel glass. So I'll get that kind of roughly in the center of the field of view there. And we'll take a look at our new MST constraint measurement setup. So we tried to give you a lot more visual feedback here on what you're doing when you're setting up an MST measurement. So you've got here on the left in this kind of pictogram is the interferometer, and then on the right is our test part, indicated by this black square here. And I need to tell the system what is the minimum distance between the transmission flat and the front of my part, and what's the maximum distance. So for my setup, the minimum distance is really just, I don't want to bump anything into the transmission flat. So I'll give myself, say, 20 millimeters, just for comfort there. The maximum distance, I have a pretty long table, but I don't need to go too far away, so we can say 250. My part thickness here, I believe, is about 1.7 millimeters, and my refractive index is 1.5. So now I've set up the constraints in my measurement. Obviously, in a situation where you're doing a so-called four-surface measurement, where you have another reference flat, there's another set of constraints, kind of about how long your table is total, but that just adds a new set of boxes to the pictogram here. Then I can hit my calculate geometry. So now we've kind of switched over to the system recommending to me how I should set up my measurement. So I'm looking for a cavity length of about 29 millimeters. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm actually pretty close to that right now. So we'll just get rough aligned there. Now in this case, because there's so many interference fringes, I'm going to actually zoom in on the align view, get these couple dots centered a little bit better. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And note that you do have these align view switching buttons down here as well, but I'm just using my wireless remote. So now I'm pretty well set up for my measurement, but you'll see that the measure button is grayed out. And if I look down on the bottom, there's a pretty clear indicator that I don't have lateral calibration set, no masks are drawn. But the big thing is this red X, I don't have a test marker. So whenever we do an FTPSI measurement, here I'm doing QFTPSI, I need to place that calibration marker. So just like masking a lateral calibration, I can drop those right on the live display. So now we should be all set. We can take a measurement. And you can see again, consistent layout with our live display, our data plots, and then along the right side, results and attributes. And then there's our measurement result. And if we wanted to do lateral calibration, masking, averaging, all of those things are available in the same way they are for any of the other measurement types. So that's the very brief, the 20-minute overview of the new measurement setup panel. We're going to start kind of reviewing if there's any questions that have come in, and we'll go from there. All right, let me just get this guy pulled out. So we have a question, what's the difference between parallel window bare and parallel window simple? So that's a good question. Those names may not be immediately obvious to people on what each of those options is. So essentially, parallel window bare is if you wanted to measure a parallel window, but only the window. So that's doing a measurement with no transmission flat. So in MetroPro, we would have called that a two-surface measurement, essentially. That would be if I were to just remove the transmission flat out. Parallel window simple is kind of the next step up. It's measuring with the transmission flat relative to a parallel window. So that's what would have been called three-surface. And then transmission is doing a quote unquote four surface. You have a transmission flat, a reference flat, and the two surfaces of your window. Homogeneity is the same physical setup, but with an additional measurement to be able to calculate homogeneity. Okay, let's get the questions back. Yeah, it's another good question. What's the camera resolution for the MST system and the maximum fringe density that can be resolved? This parallel window does have a lot of fringes, but it's actually like not even close to kind of what we could do. So this is an HD MST. So it's based on the Verifier HD mainframe, the 2300 by 2300 pixel camera. So over the full aperture, you can do easily hundreds of fringes. It definitely, there's always those concerns of like retrace and things like that, and it's really about the local slope. But by and large, you can do quite a lot with these new high resolution systems, especially compared to the old 640 by 480 type of stuff. And then another question for the MST real quick. So is the custom cavity type application still available? Yeah, so custom cavity is basically this multiple surface investigation option. You can set up a ramp and then take a measurement and then select the peak that you'd like to see. So that is definitely still available. And there's more documentation on that available that we can share. Okay, a question about smart averaging. Yeah, so let's go maybe, yeah, back to a form measurement. And I'm just going to throw the transmission flat, a little simpler cavity here. This is where that picture-in-picture comes in, very handy. All right. We can delete that guy. So smart averaging. So just a question to kind of show the controls for smart averaging. So for those who aren't familiar, smart averaging is a functionality that allows you to take continual averages until you've either hit a time limit or you have reached a noise threshold. So all of those controls for smart averaging used to kind of exist alongside the regular averaging controls. And now when you select smart averaging, you get the controls drop down right there. All right, and we'll wait a couple minutes if anybody has any more questions. Please feel free to ask, especially, or if there's just other things that you might be curious about with the changes we've made or other stuff you might want to see. We're happy to answer anything. Welcome to office hours. Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention at all, actually, that's quite handy, is for switching between measurements, kind of like what I've been doing here, where you might want to have some settings that you can quickly apply. So, for example, when we did that prism, we had these masks drawn, we had our refractive index set, and various other settings. We can save those in this quick little settings panel here. So this is my right angle prism setting. And then we can store. And this is just going to grab a snapshot of my system settings. And if I then could set up multiple of these, or say I'm off doing a different type of measurement, and then I can load back my right angle prism settings, and it will just restore me back to where I was before. So it's just a nice quick way to have some kind of quick settings that you don't need to manage as files on disk. They're saved with your application, and they're available right in the UI with nice little store, clear, and load buttons. Question about languages. This is actually a good question. So the language changing is still in progress. We've implemented some translations. We're going to be implementing more. This panel in particular is a pretty high priority. Since I'm working out of software that's being built pretty regularly with a lot of changes, I'm not sure what the level of translation is right now. But you can expect that that there will be translations available for these for most of the most common languages that we serve, and that any that aren't there will be on the short list to be done. All right, so there's a handful of other features that will be coming with MX 8.0, changes both to the form and MST applications, the analysis flow, lots of other UI improvements and consistency changes, as well as new scripting commands and profiler improvements. So keep an eye out on the website and on the upcoming events as we kind of cover those in the future. And then if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the applications team or to the Zygo support team. You can always reach us, inquire@zygo.com or support@zygo.com are great ways too. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and have a good rest of your day or night.